Welcome back to Off the Air, WFUV's podcast, where we honor the legacy of WFUV sports and its alumni. Today, we are joined by a very, very special guest from the Fordham class of 2015. She is a multi-award-winning multimedia journalist and has worked for the Norwalk Hour as a City Hall reporter and as an enterprise and education reporter for the Burlington County Times. She began right here with WFUV Sports and now works as a freelance journalist and as a writer and editor here at Fordham. We are so excited to welcome Kelly Prinz. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's great to be back and talk to some fellow FUV people.
Yeah, so you are in Fordham University right now, as we can see from your background, and you attended as a student. So I guess just to start off, what made you choose Fordham University?
Absolutely. So what I loved about Fordham was the fact that I got to have a real New York City experience and also have a campus feel. It's really attracted me to New York. It allowed me to intern, because when I was looking for colleges, I didn't really know what I wanted to study. I didn't know if I wanted to do business, communications, I wasn't really sure. So Fordham kind of offered me the opportunity to really come in, see what I was interested in studying, and it ended up being communications, and really giving me the opportunity, not only with things on campus like WFUV and the Fordham Ram, but also its location in New York City, to really allow me to intern at some really cool places, including WFAN and CBS Sports Radio, where I really got a chance to get that hands-on education, the stuff I learned at FUV and Fordham, and really put it into practice. So that was kind of one of my favorite parts, and why I chose Fordham was really its location and what it had to offer.
So you talked about, why Fordham was the right school for you, but talking specifically about WFUV, what made you get involved with the radio station and why WFUV Sports?
Sure. So I've always loved sports. I'll put that out there first. I was an only child, and my dad had season tickets to Jet games. So he started taking me to Jet games when I was about 5 years old. And that really, despite the Jets' success, really primed me for loving sports and loving the connection that fans have to their team. So I always had a passion for sports, and that's kind of how I ended up at WFUV Sports. But I joined WFUV actually my sophomore year. I didn't know too much about it coming into Fordham, and then freshman year I kept hearing all about this great program. There were kids in some of my communications courses talking about it, the hands-on learning they got, the fact they got to work on the air, work behind the scenes, do kind of a little bit of everything in terms of broadcasting. And they got to be a part of the Fordham sports games. I was going to them as a student, and I would see the students on the sideline with like the weird headset and kit on, and they'd be interviewing the players and the coaches. And I was like, this seems really cool. And as somebody interested in sports, somebody interested in communications, this seems like a great program for me. So sophomore year, at the start of sophomore year, I applied for the sports program, and I was one of, I think, about 20 who kind of did the training for a year and then got to work at the station for the last 2 years there.
That's so awesome. So then now, as you've gone into your career as a journalist past FUV and all of that, I guess, how would you say that working at FUV and being a part of this program shaped your journalistic career and your endeavors?
So much. I can't say enough about WFUV. I mean, it's one thing to learn about communications in the classroom. It's one thing to learn about journalism and sit and read a book about it or read about people who've done it. But WFUV lets you do it, right? It lets you go out there. You're out there, whether the news or the sports team, you're out there with you are a professional journalist. You're out there with other professional journalists, right? You're at press conferences for coaches with people from, WFAN, ESPN, the local NBC and CBS and affiliates there. You're right next to all those people, and you're doing the same kind of work. You're reporting, you're gathering information, you're verifying your information, you're talking with people, you're trying to find the story, trying to find those unique angles. And that's something that WFUV, I think, offers that a lot of kids don't get, because you do get to be in the professional locker rooms, right? It's not just, oh, I got to, cover the local college team, which is great and a great experience too, but you really are in the heart of the New York City media market, and you really get a chance to, be at these great events and be at these teams. During my time there, I got to cover the New York Jets, I got to cover the New York Rangers, I got to do some of our Belmont Stakes coverage, and really to be there and to go behind the scenes and talking with coaches and players and trainers, and also to, being at the Belmont Stakes and being there on game day, just kind of see that atmosphere come to life is really an invaluable experience. And I think that kind of set me up even going forward, even though I'm not really working in sports anymore. It still helped me gain those interviewing skills, those fact-finding skills, those storytelling skills that I don't think I would have developed anywhere else.
Yeah, so you just talked about being a beat reporter at WFUV for the Jets, the the Rangers, I think the Yankees as well. What has stuck with you most about those experiences, and what have you been able to take away from being able to cover those games?
Absolutely. So I did the Staten Island Yankees, actually, didn't get to do the regular Yankees. That's okay. I think all of those really, what really stuck with me is the fact of being able to learn how to hone in my interviewing skills at those places, especially after the games. I vividly remember being in the Rangers locker room, right, as they were about to go to the playoffs that year in 2015. And just to kind of be there and see the players' excitement and to really, have to be a part of that and to be able to stay focused though. Okay, I need to talk to this many players. I need to make sure I get the sound bites. I need to make sure I send them back to the station so they can be played on air, so make sure the quality is good. And that really, I think those experiences, both being able to see the excitement and to see there and be a part of those experiences that not many people get to be there, not many people get to see a locker room, people get excited about making the playoffs, but to also the ability to have learned from WFUV's experience, to learn from my training, I was able to kind of really hone in and focus and be able to ask the right questions and make sure we got the right sounds. That way it could be used for the radio broadcast too.
Yeah, absolutely. You were just talking about everything with the radio broadcasts and sending everything back to the station, which Mike and I both know well. So you did a lot of on-air work at FUV as a sideline reporter and studio host and host of One-on-One and all of that. So do you have any particular memories or stark moments that stand out from those experiences?
I do actually. I think it was September. I don't want to mess up the year here, but it was the game that the Fordham football beat Temple, which was a huge win in the Fordham football history. And I was the studio host that day. So I remember we had as a studio host, I was in there taking notes. And I remember kind of okay, this is what we're going to do. This is the highlight. These are the programs we're going to do. And then Michael Niebrick and Sam Ajala went on this game-winning drive, and you had to throw out all the notes because obviously that's the call that we're going to go with. That's the one that means the most. So really just being able to think on my feet. I remember Mike Watts had the call of that game, and just kind of the excitement in his voice and just to make sure it really captured that moment. I think that really stands out to me is, just being everything happening at once, being on air, having something happen last minute, having the producer in your ear being like, oh, they're coming back to you in 30 seconds. And you're scribbling down something too, oh, this is what I want to say. But I think that was one of my favorite memories because not only did it teach me so many things about thinking on my feet and working with the control room and working with people who were at the stadium, making sure to send it back to them in time, but it also was just such an exciting moment to be a part of, to see, Little Fordham, our FCS football program, take down this, FBS school in Temple. It was just such an amazing moment to be a part of and one of my all-time favorite WFUV memories.
Yeah, I remember that because my brother was either going to go to Fordham soon. When that happened, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe Fordham beat Temple. So it's crazy. That's also such a great experience for you. Outside of WFUV, you also did a lot while you're at Fordham, intern, I think at WFAN, CBS Sports Radio. What was it like to just be in those professional environments and, as a college kid to have those experiences and get that experience?
Absolutely. So I wouldn't have gotten those without WFUV either, right? I talked about my on-air work, which is I loved, but also, WFUV really lets you learn a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. So cutting audio, editing audio, running the board in the studio during a game. Those are all skills that I learned at WFUV that I was able to then use at my internship. So interning at WFAN was a really fun experience. I had the chance to work on the morning show, which was Boomer and Carton back then. And so Jerry Recco was the update anchor. So I would work pretty closely with him and making sure his sound was cut during my internship, making sure he had the right clips he wanted to use. And I know he liked them very short and tight. So that was definitely an experience of learning how to edit audio for him, making sure it was short and ready. And, he always kind of liked to some of the funnier clips, not just the we did great today at the, post-game comments that people traditionally say. He was always looking for the out of the box sound. So to kind of try and hunt for those through all the audio clips that were coming back in was definitely something. And then CBS Sports Radio, that was a really interesting experience because WFAN is so New York focused, as I'm sure you guys know and listeners know. It's just about New York sports, whereas CBS Sports Radio is this national radio network. And so you're getting feeds in from all across the country. And, what matters in New York doesn't always, matter to the San Francisco Giants winning. You have to make sure you get that sound. So that way it has, the California audience can hear it too. So that was kind of a really interesting experience of how to pay attention to a lot of games at once, how to, see which one was coming in first. And we had to change feeds sometimes of okay, this game is going to the bottom of the ninth. Let's switch the feed there to make sure we can get the, last call from that game. So I think that was a really fun experience to see how a national market differs from a very local station.
Totally. And then you were saying doing a lot of things at once, which you did when you attended Fordham University, as you obviously know. You were, in addition to being a beat reporter and working at FUV, you were also the editor-in-chief of the Fordham Ram. So how did that and how did working at that newspaper help you develop as a journalist?
Absolutely. So I think what was unique about my Fordham experience and what I think has helped me in my career is I kind of got to do both a news and sports track. And my career kind of took me in the news track, but I'm still very grateful for all the sports experience I got at WFUV and the skills I learned there, because at the Ram, I started out as an assistant news editor, became news editor and then editor-in-chief. And then I got to do that kind of in concert with my work at WFUV Sports and really getting to learn, sideline reporting and the ins and outs of football, basketball, hockey, etc. So I think that for the Ram, what it allowed me to do was to practice my writing skills. I was able to practice interviewing and see how I guess interviews work for different mediums, right? It's easier sometimes to say things in writing, but it doesn't come across as passionately as if you hear someone say it, where it comes across and you can feel the emotion in their voice. And that's something that I always loved about audio. But in writing, sometimes it's easier. You can give the background story. You can give kind of a little bit of context to people's quotes. So I think the Ram really helped me with that skill set and to really help me develop as a multimedia reporter in terms of the fact that I was able to, shoot some photos for them occasionally and then also do writing and editing and really hone in on my copy editing skills as well. And then I got to pair that with the work at WFUV and to really, learn how audio is different, learn how to write for both the written word and the spoken word and kind of put those skill sets together.
So when you made the transition, from sports to more, news, government, community-based multimedia journalism, how did that work and how was the adjustment there? And, what were some differences? What were some things you learned from making that transition?
Absolutely. Sports are really fun, I would say, for the most part. That was something that I love, is that there's so much fun you can say with sports, both on and off the field. I know, WFUV, besides the game coverage, I got to do some things like, I think, Yankees Hope Week, which was a really cool experience. And that kind of combined, I would say, a little bit of news and sports because it was covering an event. It was seeing the players in an atmosphere outside of the ballpark, outside of the stadium. And so I kind of was able to take those skills, I guess, of interviewing, of, being able to juggle different things, of having to think on your feet really quick, come up with follow-up questions and be able to transition from one thing to another into the world of news and community journalism. And I think that one of the things that WFUV and WFUV Sports told me was to kind of try to find the story that not everyone is telling. I think that was something that Bob Aarons kind of emphasized to us too, is that, the New York media market can be saturated sometimes. So how do we set ourselves apart? How do we tell that story that maybe, is not going to be the headline from the New York Post, is not going to be the headline from the Daily News? How can we find those stories behind the scenes? So I was able to kind of take that, especially into my work as a journalist, and to really kind of look for the stories that aren't being told, that are kind of no one else is looking into, no one else is exploring, no one else is really telling, and to find voices and stories that maybe had been going unheard or hadn't been represented before. And that's something that I've tried to carry with me ever since then. And also too, I think, again, going back to the fact that sports can be a lot of fun, I think that that's something that, our media system doesn't have a lot of. So I think that that's something too I've tried to do, is to try to find the fun stories, try to find the interesting stories and tell things that matter, maybe in a more interesting way, whether that's through writing or through, I got to do a little video work in my career too. So kind of telling those stories in different ways and to really make them come to life for people. So that way it's not just, oh, there's a budget meeting, you have to learn about it. It's like, okay, well, what's in that? What's something exciting? How's that going to affect you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you were just talking about telling the lesser known story and kind of finding that. And I hate to quote you to you right now, but you say in your bio that you believe that, quote, the role of local and regional journalists is to show how government impacts communities and bring to light issues in those areas that need to be brought front and center, like you were just talking about. So could you talk about kind of what brought you to that belief system and how that has then shaped your experience when you're writing and producing media through that lens?
Absolutely. So I think I'll tell it through, I guess, kind of the story or series of stories I did. When I was working at the Burlington County Times in South Jersey, I did a series of stories on the opioid crisis down there. And one of the things that really stood out to me was I had heard at a local meeting, I was sitting at a Board of Education meeting, and they were talking about using Narcan in schools. And that kind of caught my attention because I was, like, why do we need to use Narcan? This is, it's a simple policy change, but it's interesting that this high school is talking about bringing Narcan there, which is kind of to use to revive people who have suffered from an overdose. And so I started looking into it, and I noticed that our newspaper had really only ever done crime coverage, right? So-and-so got arrested for heroin possession, so-and-so got arrested for having drugs on them, but I don't think we ever really explored behind that. So that was something that kind of stood out to me. And then in my months reporting there, and I'm very grateful that the newspaper there let me, it was not the easiest time for newspapers. Resources are a little scarce. So I was very grateful for my editors there for giving me some time and space to really reach out to community members, reach out to community groups, reach out to families who had suffered loss and to people who had been in recovery to kind of really get a fuller picture and story. And I think that that reporting process has stuck with me so much since then, because just the look on some of their faces sometimes that someone was listening to them and somebody wanted to hear their story and wanted to understand, how their family was going through this difficult time and why they wanted to share their son's story so that way maybe they could make a difference in another child's life, or what it was like for them to, have been struggling with addiction and to recover from that and what that looked like for them. Just to find out that somebody cared about them and wanted to share their story, I won't ever forget those people's faces and how they felt about that, and kind of, just the thank you for listening is what they basically would say to me so often. And I think that was something that I think is really important for journalists across the country, student, professionals to really think about is how are our stories, how are what we are telling impacting people? And I think that they did such a great job of, showing why it matters to raise up those voices and to find those stories that people aren't talking about, and to see, how it's made a difference in their lives. They were able to use the stories I told about them to, show to other organizations, highlight their work, to use it as proof, honestly, for some government funding for them to apply for grants and to kind of, to support their work as well. So I think that that's something that really stood out to me, is just making sure that there are so many stories out there that aren't being told, and kind of, giving those people the respect and ability to tell their stories was something that really mattered to me, and something that stuck with me ever since.
Yeah, so you just talked about, covering that opioid crisis story with State of Emergency series. What inspired that project, and, what got you involved to cover that?
So that was a really interesting collaboration between myself and two other reporters, Marian Callahan and Jenny Wagner, who I worked with, who the way the newspapers were set up down at the time was this family owned 3 newspapers in South Jersey and in Pennsylvania. And so they had seen some of my initial reporting on the opioid crisis that I had done myself. And then they were talking about the fact that it was a big challenge for them there as well, and what issues were kind of crossing borders, right? What issues were both Pennsylvania and New Jersey facing? And the states were taking very different approaches to how they were addressing them, right? At the time, it was Governor Christie in New Jersey who had declared it a state of emergency, and kind of what efforts he was putting forth. And then in Pennsylvania, the laws were a little different too. They had different funding mechanisms than New Jersey did. So we kind of were inspired by some individual reporting on both sides of the river there. And we decided to kind of combine forces then to think about, okay, how can we tell the story bigger? How can we tell it broader? How can we really find issues that are crossing borders and mattering to people? And so to your point, kind of the impetus for that was some of the original reporting I had done in New Jersey, and then what they had done in Pennsylvania. And we decided that, it was a good opportunity to really see if we could use the platform of the newspaper to elevate these voices of people who were on the streets, who were fighting this battle every day of trying to get people help, of people who were trying to get help, and kind of really highlighting those stories that matter to members of the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And was there anything in this coverage of the crisis that surprised you, or anything that was maybe a shock to learn, something you didn't expect going into it when you first began this series that ended up lasting over a year?
There were definitely a lot of things. The thing that jumped to mind is just so like the love and care that so many people had in the community. There was this one family I covered who lost their son, Chris, and they, telling their story, they took out a second mortgage on their house to help pay for his treatment and to really help pay for, his efforts in recovery. And I think that that's something we don't think about all the time is, how much impact this has on the family as a whole. It's not just the person who's struggling, and of course they have their own challenges and things that they need to deal with, but the whole family is really impacted by it financially, emotionally. They're kind of drained from it. And I think that really stood out to me, is just, wow, you don't always think about people taking out second mortgages or having to raise their grandkids, but those were things that kind of really came out of that series that I think shocked me, and I think shocked some of our readers too, when they were like, I didn't realize that this was a problem, right? Oftentimes it's like, there's not enough beds, and you hear that very often, and that still is a problem. But for, to think about, having to raise your grandkid, what does that look like? Having to take out a second mortgage, what does that look like? It's those personal stories that I think were kind of really shocking to me that I didn't realize were happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess off of that, there was a Facebook group opened as a response to this project to engage with community members that was allowing a space for questions and direction. And I guess, how do you feel that that then impacted the project as a whole, or how it impacted your engagement with the community, or what you saw come out of that? Because that's, I think, a really special thing to see happen when so often it's like the story is then done, but this was a prolonged project within the community.
Yeah, and I think that that was, I really thought that that helped kind of guide our reporting, I would say, in a lot of ways. Like, we had kind of an initial idea of one or two stories we wanted to tell at the start, but we kind of started hearing from members of the community in that Facebook group in particular of being like, hey, we're having this meeting or this event at that day, would you come? And so we would get invited to these things, and we would use that and go to these events and meet a whole new group of people, and they had their whole new set of stories that they were able to tell us. And it really opened up a whole bunch of different avenues for us. And I think it also helped build trust a little bit. I think, people respected the fact that we showed up for them, that we were there for them, that we were able to answer questions that they had, whether it was, oh, I saw your story on sober houses, and do you have any other information? And we could send them a link to our story and to other resources that we had used to do our reporting. And they were very appreciative of that kind of like one-on-one communication, because I think especially in local journalism, right, it feels you really are a part of that community. It feels different if you're watching TV and the person is sitting, in a studio hundreds of miles away from you. But as a local journalist, right, like I lived in the same town as some of these people. I went to the supermarket they went to too. So I think kind of showing up and being there for them really meant a lot. And I think that Facebook group was a great example of a way we could hear direct feedback and not just, hoping our story mattered to people and hoping it did well out there. We were able to really hear from them about, oh, I appreciated this part, or, oh, I didn't actually appreciate this part. You didn't add this perspective. Could you do that next time? And I think that that helped us become better reporters and more responsive to the community too, because then we'd be like, oh, we didn't think about including a person in recovery in that story, but you're right, that probably was a voice you were missing. So I think we, made us better too as we went through this year-long series.
You have recently founded the Coastal Connecticut Times, covering news in Southeast Connecticut. I was just looking at that. I was just wondering, what inspired that? And then what's been the journey, running your own news site? That's something that I was really wondering about.
Sure. So that's kind of started as a side project. Like I mentioned, I do work for Fordham. So I do that full time as a, writer and editor for Fordham. But so kind of on my weekends and nights, what I've been doing is listening to local government meetings, going to local community events, and kind of the inspiration for that is, over the pandemic, I kind of noticed that I didn't really feel like there was a lot of local news that was valuable, or that I could find that I was looking for personally, and friends were looking for too, about, what's happening in my community and why. And that's kind of been a question that's come up a lot of times in talking with residents around my area. I used to work in the area as a journalist, so I have a lot of connections there still, and kind of hearing from people about this meeting's happening. I didn't know when, I didn't know about this meeting, I didn't know about this project. What's getting built here? Why is my road shut down? People just didn't have this basic information. So I thought about trying to start a site about to kind of provide that. And then the other side of the question came up too about, well, why are things happening, right? Why is my community flooding more than it used to? Why are all my schools under construction? Like, why is enrollment growing in my town? Why? A lot of these why questions came up. So I kind of paired them both together for this project. And I had the opportunity to take a class over the summer through the Google News Initiative. And it was kind of a boot camp class where we would meet once a week at night. And I would kind of have the chance to, study and put a little bit of that into practice, right? I'd go to late night meetings with people, and I'd talk to them after work and kind of get their sense to what they were missing. So I'm kind of, like I said, it's in the very early stages, this site right now. But my goal with it is to really help be a resource for the community, to kind of provide that basic information of, we do a weekly newsletter about, here are the important meetings that are happening, here are the initiatives that are happening in your area, so people can have that basic sense of, oh, I do care about this development project in town. It's on the agenda for Tuesday's meeting. Let me go to that. And then also trying to do some original reporting that answers the why. So far, done a series on mental health in the area, because that kind of kept coming up to the top at a lot of these meetings, is, well, what are the specific mental health challenges in Connecticut? What are some of the providers doing about it? And then providing people with the fact that, okay, there is this challenge. How can you get involved, right? Whether it's if you want to call your legislator, whether it's if you want to volunteer your time, whether if you want to do all these different things. And I think that that's part of what I'm hoping to do with the site.
That's excellent. And then, so you were saying about like shaping everything in the community and creating a foundation for communication through that. And so we are obviously both still in college. And I mean, I can't speak for how Mike is doing in this journey, but I know we're at an age where a lot of us are kind of trying to figure out our voice as journalists, as media producers. I know at least I am, definitely. So I guess, was there a particular moment or moments where you felt like you had really like formed your worldview as a journalist or anything like that? Because I think, yeah, so many of us are just at this age where everything is so up in the air.
No, that's a great question. That's a really great question. I would say my worldview is definitely continuing to evolve, right? I think that I guess, advice or the way my worldview evolves is talking with different people. And I think that that's something that I think is so important for journalists and media members and communications professionals of all ages, is to really get out there and to talk to your audience, to talk to people who you want to engage with, because I think that that's what matters most, right? You want to provide a service to them. That's my view of journalism anyway, is to provide a service for people and to provide them with information that can better their lives. So I think that in order to do that, you need to talk to them. And I think that my worldview continues to shift from that, being able to, as a reporter at the Burlington County Times, cover stories of people who were undocumented, people who were in recovery, people who were parents, people who were single parents, and to really kind of get that connection to those people. And then also to, even in my work at Fordham, being able to tell the stories of people here who, are alumni who have started their own business or who are students studying a specific research project. I think that all of those voices kind of help me shape my worldview and shape how I feel about things or how I think about issues. And it, makes me, think of, okay, well, this mom thought this way because, she's a single parent. I don't have that experience, but she does. So what is that like for her? And how would this decision affect her? So I think that that's something that I try to keep in mind and kind of continue to as my worldview evolves for journalism.
And so I know we mentioned the State of Emergency series, but has there been any other stories that you've worked on that maybe you've really enjoyed writing or working on, or maybe ones that particularly moved you and, helped change you or become the journalist you are now?
Sure. I would say that one was obviously a very big one. There was also, I would say there's two others. One was at, still on to the Burlington County Times, I did a series on farmers. And that was really interesting to me because it was a big story on, how the different seasons were affecting these local farmers. And that was something to me that I never really thought of. I'll be very honest, as somebody who, goes to the grocery store to get most of her food there. I never thought about where food came from often, but talking with them and kind of, they took me out into their fields and showed me, okay, the deer really ate my crop and now I'm going to suffer thousands of dollars of loss, or my fields got flooded and this is what this means for this crop I'm producing. And that really kind of opened my eyes to a different world of just like, you don't think about, oh God, the corn that you buy in the store does come from this family who farms it until you see it kind of for yourself. And I think that that was a really powerful story for me, and just making sure, of keeping my perspectives open and of just kind of thinking about the story behind the story and kind of, just like I said, kind of seeing where things come from and how they happen. And then I would also say a story from my time here at Fordham that really stuck out to me too in telling is we did a story on alumni who were working on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that was a really fascinating and eye-opening look too, to really, see how our alumni from so many different fields, who were doctors, who were nurse practitioners, who were healthcare workers, and who were really risking themselves to kind of help people, to kind of support them during these challenging times, and then to, not always worry about themselves, but putting themselves second and putting these people who they were caring for first. And I think that that was a really fascinating story to be able to be a part of and tell and to share, the healthcare worker stories, because I think at that time too, we didn't know about what they were going through. And it was really interesting to see, how their lives changed so much from COVID, how they COVID took over everything in their lives, right? No matter what specialty they were now a COVID responder. So I think that that was something that really stood out to me too, is just kind of being able to tell and elevate their stories.
You've written a number of very impactful stories. So I guess, and now because of those, you've been a winner and a finalist for multiple different awards over your time as a journalist. Is there one that you're most proud of or that just really like sticks out to you?
Absolutely. The Wilson Bardo Rookie of the Year award I won in New Jersey really meant a lot to me, because I think that that kind of stood out as somebody, saying that they saw me early in my career as a journalist and saying that they, my writing made a difference, and saying that, my work really stood out to them. So I think that was one. And then the other one was kind of a community award I won on, it was the first time ever, I guess, a group of some of the people who were in recovery and who were community prevention providers in South Jersey put together an award at one of their, I guess, like awareness events. And they gave it to me to kind of thank me for elevating their stories for the opioid crisis. And that really meant a lot to me, because that came from the community and not just a professional organization, but that really came from community members who felt that my work was making a difference for them.
So yeah, we talked so much about your career as a journalist on air at Fordham, and now it seems like you find yourself coming full circle, working again at Fordham. What does that mean to you? And I guess just how does it seem that you started your career at Fordham and now you're back at Fordham where you're still working as a journalist?
Yeah, absolutely. Fordham's kind of been there for me in all parts of my life, right? I'm very grateful to Fordham as an institution. It's given me so many wonderful things from not only my career, I mean, personal life. I have made friends for life at Fordham and at WFUV that I'm forever grateful for. And so it's different coming back. I would have to say, as a staff member, it's definitely a different perspective to kind of see, the university through a different lens. But I would say what I love about coming here and coming full circle is kind of Fordham's mission, right? That doesn't change. The fact that it wants to, bring in students and make them into change makers, to make them into men and women for others, and to make them, care about people across the country, across the world, and to really make you kind of have that sense of cura personalis really stands out to me. So I think that in my time at Fordham now, I try to continue to tell those stories. So I work a lot with our undergraduate admissions team and recruiting prospective students. So I work with a lot of telling stories about young alumni, telling stories that might interest high school students, that when they could picture themselves coming to Fordham, coming to be like what you guys are, to kind of see themselves here at Fordham. So I kind of keep that mission in mind too in my work, and trying to think about, how do I tell stories that matter to high school students? How do I write copy? How do I create information pamphlets or brochures or presentations that can really help young people as they make their decision consider Fordham as an option? Because it does, it means a lot to me, and it means a lot, I think, to so many other Fordham students too, and kind of that mission, and how do we continue to share it with the next generation?
Yeah, totally. And now that you are back, and I guess seeing FUV in its entirety from the outside, what do you see that is similar, or I guess dissimilar, to your time at FUV Sports?
Sure. So I would say one of the biggest things is you guys do so much more. Not that we didn't do a lot back then, we did, but I know you guys are much more involved with video and digital content. And I think that was just kind of coming on as I was leaving. I think it was my senior year, we started playing around with some of the video cameras. We started kind of testing out some of the, shooting video shots, shooting stand-ups, doing all of that work there. So I think you guys have come so far in that regard. I think that one of the great things about WFUV is that it does continue to evolve with the times, right? So video content is a huge thing now for your audience, for trying to reach people. So I think that that's a really exciting phase to see WFUV move into. But I also think that what stayed the same, and what I'm grateful for, is the fact that it does give students this really incredible hands-on opportunity that I don't think they would get many other places. I know even now, telling Fordham stories, we love to look for WFUV stories, because we love to highlight students like you guys who are really out in the field doing this kind of work, because that's almost unheard of in a lot of other places. I think that that's something that's I'm glad to see that mission has stayed intact despite the pandemic, despite all the different changes in media as a whole over the last couple of years.
Totally. And then before we go, we're almost out of time, but I just want to ask if there is anything else you want to leave us with, any other stories from your time at FUV, or words of wisdom from your career as a journalist so far.
I think I would just basically say, listen to the people and take advice from people who are in charge there. I know Bob Aarons isn't there, but I know Bobby Chaffardini was there when he kind of came in towards the end of my time there, but both of them meant so much to me. I think Bob Aarons was a great mentor for me, and kind of really helped set me on a path. I probably talked too fast in this interview, and he's probably yelling at me from his couch now, but always tried to tell me to slow down when I could, and to try to really, again, get me to think outside the box, and to get me to think of different story ideas. So I'm forever grateful for that. And so I guess piece of advice would be, listen to the great mentors there. I know on the news side, Robin Shannon does an amazing job, and she helped me even too when I was anchoring the AM updates, and it was just her and I in the studio. She would give me tips sometimes, and she would give me help and support. So just, there's a really great group of people there at WFUV, and I hope you guys and everyone there can take advantage of all their advice and wisdom and learn from them, because they've helped me so much.
Absolutely. I get the note to slow down all the time. So I feel you on that one as a fellow fast talker. But that is all the time we have today. I want to say thank you so much for joining us, Kelly, and for providing us with all of your stories and words of wisdom. And I hope to see you around Fordham.
Absolutely. I'm at Rose Hill about once a month, so I'll come stop by and say hi.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.